Welcome to Two Bees in a Pod. I am Bilola.
And I am B. Leonga, and this is a podcast about immigrant experiences in the U.S., sharing our perspectives on various topics,
Including straddling cultures, fitting in, staying connected, learning and unlearning the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to this week's episode. We are going to be discussing our July book of the month, which was Travelers by Helon Habila. And our icebreaker today is really relevant to the subject of this book. The question is, what was your biggest fear as an immigrant in the US prior to getting DOCI? That is, prior to getting, I don't know if you consider your green card the finish line or your American passport the finish line, but prior to that finish line, what was your biggest fear?
I think that I'm going to answer this from the perspective of each step. I think being on a student visa, my biggest fear was getting out of school. What next? What if I didn't get a job where I could use my OPT? And I remember we had 90 days to find a job. I found my job at day 80 something. We had about 90 days to get a job, and I had made my peace with going back to Cameroon at that time. Because I tried finding jobs in Cameroon even when I was looking, and I was willing to go. So at that point, I don't know. I was anxious about the clock ticking, but I was just if it ran out and I did not have a job, I was going to leave. And then getting the job was also, I need to find a job that will sponsor. So that solved that because the company that offered me a job also was going to file for me. They had converted my OPT to an H-1B visa. I think those were the ones that really mattered. My biggest fear prior to getting an American passport was just my sister would say, let's go on a trip. And then I have to say, I go with, is it visa free for permanent residents? That was probably the biggest hang up before getting a US passport. It was just having to plan a trip and worrying about whether I could go, because there were several trips we were going to take. We could not go. Once there was an open flight to Hong Kong, I needed a visa. I literally had to call the embassy or something yeah, you need a visa. There was an empty flight to Australia. I needed a visa for that. So that was my biggest hiccup, I would say.
That is very frustrating. I mean, I did not experience it, but I remember that trip where I went to Anguilla. So my friend and I, at that time, she was on a Cameroon passport with a green card. I was on a British passport with a green card. So we wanted to take a day trip from Anguilla to St. Martin. So we got the ferry, got to St. Martin, and they turned her back. Obviously, I went back with her. They turned her back because she didn't have the right Schengen visa or some bullshit like that. It was really frustrating. So I can definitely relate. I mean, thankfully it was just a day trip. It didn't ruin our vacation, but yeah. I was really? That's so petty. But I guess rules are rules.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I guess.
Yeah. For me, I didn't experience OPT because I went, I got my green card while I went out of status for my student visa, which was one of the fears that I had, and it happened. So obviously I left America, and then I came back and figured it out. And then, I went back to school with that temporary green card. So, I mean, one of my biggest fears happened.
Wait, you left America? You left America and went to where? To Cameroon or went to England?
No, I went to England. Yeah. Then I came back. Which, to be honest, that decision, I remember at the time, one of my sisters was like, "But why are you going back?" But I didn't want to stay there and start over, In my mind at the time, it was such a monumental feat. Thinking of, I mean, looking back now, I probably wouldn't. I was probably making a much bigger deal. I probably would have adjusted just fine, but it was just, to me, at that point, it was no way, I have to go back to America. I was digging in my heels. Yeah, so I did that. And then, as a green card holder, I remember when I was working at the bank, one of my customers, I met this guy who was either an ICE agent or something to do with immigration, and he was kind of talking about how the things you can do to lose your green card, the different He's like, it doesn't even have to be a felony. There's certain things, certain crimes that you can do and they'll revoke your green card. So that scared the shit out of me. I was like, let me hurry up and get this passport. Because, I mean, your green card can be revoked. It's not, you know.
I think the passport can be revoked.
Can it?
Mm-hmm. The only people who have permanent passports are like those born. If you naturalize, they can take it back.
So in the UK, I know they can do that because they did that. This is a very sad story. They did that to Shamima Begum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't know that could happen in America too.
It's refundable.
All right. So we need to be on our best behavior.
But I think you have to like, it's not for like petty things. You have to I mean,
that
like
kind of serious thing like she did.
I want to think that if you went to the capital on January 6th and you're a naturalized citizen, I think that's grounds to get it taken back because
it is, because first of all, why are you there? You're doing there. I better not hear that there was a naturalized citizen among that crowd. Because what do you mean? What are you doing there amongst those people?
Some people get carried away.
My goodness, that's really a definition of carry. You came to America and you got carried away to the point that you want to participate in a coup d'etat.
I mean, to be fair, right? I think that a lot of people, when people look at immigrants or people who don't belong, it's superficial things, because the white South Africans, white Zimbabweans, or even French, British immigrants, nobody is really looking at them. And so they too can think that they're Hmong.
True. That's true. I mean, look at Elon Musk.
Bro!
But to be fair, I don't know his parentage. I mean, are both of his parents South African?
No, his mother, he's actually a recent South African in that his ancestors, maybe his grandfather or his father, liked what they saw in South Africa and they decided to move there. So they're not like from Cecile Rhodes' generation or anything.
Oh, really?
No, they're
Okay.
Canadian. And so, yes, when he left South Africa, he went to Canada because I think his mom retained Canadian citizenship.
Okay, and then obviously I assume he's an American citizen with the antics that he's pulling. He must be.
Yeah, so, I mean, if he was any other color, I feel like somebody remind him to go back to where you're from. But he gets a pass because...
I'll never forget the day on Twitter, which stupid politician was this? And it was a black politician too, that said Elon Musk is technically African American because he's South African. And the way I almost jumped through my phone, I said, be so fucking for real.
I want to say a lot, but I don't want to say too much because I'm personally not comfortable, based on my personal interactions that I've had with a handful of South Africans of white descent. I'm not very comfortable.
I don't think I've met any, to be honest. I haven't. I mean, South Africa's on my bucket list. I haven't been, but yeah, I haven't met any white South Africans.
I went to school with one and she's like, so crime ridden, and she had nothing good to say about it. And all I kept thinking was like, man, but you're in Arkansas. You live in rural Arkansas. Like, yeah. Okay.
Anyway. All right. So again, our novel for July, our July book of the month was Travelers by Helon Habila. It was published in 2019. And it follows the stories of several different immigrants in Europe. The story is primarily narrated through the voice of I don't know his name.
He doesn't have a name.
Us?
No, he doesn't have a name.
Okay. I thought I was tripping.
He's just the narrator.
The narrator is a Nigerian who is a PhD candidate in America who moves to Germany with his wife, who's a painter. She's on a fellowship there. So as the story unfolds, he meets these different immigrants in Europe and Switzerland primarily is where he meets them, and a little bit in Italy as well. And we get a little bit of their stories through his interactions with them, but then also through their own voices individually. And it was really, really, I love that book. This is my second time reading it. And like I said, one of the reasons I decided to pick the book was that, of course, we talk a lot about immigration here, but we don't really talk about European experiences or immigrant experiences in Europe. So I found that really fascinating when I read the book, and then kind of just to compare, what the similarities and the differences. I found it interesting.
It was very interesting, and it offered a different window of the immigrant experience, because we always say we are sharing immigrant stories from our perspective, where we came, I want to say, in a straightforward kind of path, and his story, it covers so much because it tells the story of different immigrants from different places, but it also gives you a glimpse into what those places looked before these people had to leave. I always say that one thing that I enjoy about Khaled Hosseini's writing and the way he describes Afghanistan is because the image I have of Afghanistan is based from his point of view, which is nothing like they describe Afghanistan from, after the Taliban's came in and the war that has been there since 2001. And so, like, in this story, something that really captivated me was the way everybody talked of their homeland. And whenever people say, oh, go back to where you're from, a lot of immigrants are not immigrants by choice, but by circumstance. I would say that we are immigrants by choice, but by and large, people are just trying to seek a better life because they felt like they had no other options where they were. And I like that the book humanizes a lot of these stories.
Yeah, agreed. And so obviously the novel, like we said, it gives a perspective of different immigrants through the eyes of the narrator and then directly through their own stories. So they're different, they come from different countries. They're all Africans, right? Everybody that he
Yeah.
meets. Yeah. Nigeria, Libya, Zambia, Somalia. So what are some of the, I guess, which of these immigrants, which of their stories was the most captivating to you or jarring?
Man, all of them. Actually, the most jarring one for me was the narrators. His experience in between when he was going back to Berlin from Switzerland and what happened to him there. That that just, because all I could think about was like, your life could change as an immigrant, right? Your life could change in a heartbeat. I always joke about the fact that I'm very careless with my American passport, in a sense that I don't always know where it is. I found it in the kitchen, I found it in the closet somewhere. I could always tell you the exact longitude and latitude of my Cameroonian passport at any moment in time, because I knew, one, if it got missing, it could throw a lot of things. And then having to deal with the Cameroonian embassy was just not something I wanted to do. And like, yes, even when I was a permanent resident, the card almost had no value without the pass. Like, they went hand in hand.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, I was very careful with my Cameroonian passport in a way that I'm not. I'm not as, because in my head, it's like, if it gets missing, I'll just go. I'll go and do expedited passport, right? If push comes to shove. But I'm not afraid of going to get another one in the way that I was not playing with my Cameroonian passport. And this story just reminded me about why. Because in that kind of situation, what do you do? Like, how do you start trying to convince the Cameroonian embassy?
So
Listen,
for the listeners, right, at one point in this book, kind of towards the end,
then
the narrator, again, he is a Nigerian who was doing his PhD in the US. So he has a Nigerian passport and an American green card. He is in Germany. He gets on a train. Is it? No, he gets on a train from Switzerland and
Switzerland
yeah,
going
he's trying to get back to
to
Berlin.
Berlin via Frankfurt, I believe. Yes,
Yes.
yes,
So he gets on this train and meets one of the other characters in the novel, this
Karim.
Somali man and his son, and they're talking, and this is where we learn about Karim's story. As our narrator gets off the train, he gets onto the platform in the train station. The train has left. He realizes that the bag that he has with him is Karim's bag and not his bag. That bag he has left on the train with Karim has his Nigerian passport and his American green card. He has nothing else No other
Sure.
identification on him. The train is gone. He tries to get help from an officer or somebody, an official person at the station. They send him somewhere. He sees a train pull in and he kind of panics. He thinks that he sees Karim in the window, right? I don't know why he thought that. He runs onto this train to try to, and then when he gets to the person, he realizes it's not Karim. And he's obviously his bag is not on that train. Now he's sitting on this train. He's like, okay, I'll just get off at the next stop. The train is going, passing all the stations. It's not stopping. It's not stopping. It's not stopping.
Wow.
Then they get somewhere. I don't know where they get to, and he sees like, kind of police are bringing more people onto the train, kind of forcefully. So he asks somebody like, "Where is this train going?" And the person looks at him like he's crazy. Like, we're going to a refugee camp.
In Italy.
Like they're being deported out of, I guess, Germany,
EU,
right?
they're taking them out of basically to where they take migrants who try to get into EU into a place in Italy where is essentially not the EU.
I don't know, yeah, something, but they take them
Yeah.
to this place in Italy, like so. So just imagine this predicament, right? He's obviously black, you know. How will you go and start explaining to the immigration officials that, hey, I'm actually not supposed to be with these people that you're deporting because I have a visa? He had a visa for Germany in his Nigerian passport and he had an American green card. So he's obviously not. How clearly he could not convince anybody of that because they did take
And I
him to
think
the refugee camp.
something that did not help him when he said he was Nigerian. That was just like, yeah, bro, no. But I don't think I was going to check. I forgot to check because I wanted to check what recourse you have as a permanent resident if you lose your residency card abroad. Because in the story, it said that when he went to the consular office somewhere in Italy, they said they couldn't do anything and he had to reapply for a new one from within the. But if it's missing when you're outside, what do you do?
I think what killed him was that he lost his. If he had his Nigerian passport, then the American might have been inclined because he could at least identify himself.
But I mean, we live in the age of biometrics now.
That's true. Because yeah, they did tell him that he had to go back to Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
Which doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Because they can look in their computer, they can see that he is a permanent resident. They should be able to give him some kind of temporary paper, at least to go back to America where he can get, that part. But anyway, that was the situation he was in.
That
Nightmare.
part of the book, that part of the book really got me.
Mm-hmm.
It was because it could happen to anybody, right? You go on trips, and now that we're talking about it, I'm like, but why didn't he have a picture of his passport in his phone? And I asked that because I have mine, I have my cousins, and I needed it for something, but it's something that I like to have on hand just in case. Because they always
say, driver's license.
Keep a copy of, when you're traveling, take a photocopy of your passport and other documents. And so I always keep it on my phone, and that's what I'm thinking about. But I guess this was for the plot, so.
Yeah, and the character himself, there are points where he kind of annoyed me. He's not the most responsible. He kind of makes some rash decisions.
He's not. I think he's really described as like, he sounded like, when you read books or like more, they talk about like university lecturers back in the day, like artists who are not tied to possessions or anything. Yeah. Everything in life is so simple.
They're just
for
floating.
them. Yes, he's not fighting for anything. He's just being and living.
Yep. Yeah. One of the other characters whose story struck me was Mark, aka Mary, right? So Mark is this very feisty man that our narrator meets. He's kind of a transient. He had a student visa. He has fallen out of status. When we meet him, he's living in a church, right? They get kicked out. Then he's sent to this refugee camp. Not a refugee. Is it a refugee camp?
It was a refugee camp.
Yeah, and the place sounds horrible. Anyway, later on we find out that Mark was assigned female at birth, right? So Mark is a trans man, essentially.
No, Mark was cross-dressing. Yes.
Really?
That's the way the lawyer said it. Mark
But
had
maybe the
not.
lawyer did not have the right language. That's what I interpreted. Because if you're going by
I
he, then you're not cross dressing. If you're using the pronouns.
This is outside of my realm of
Me
jurisdiction.
too.
So,
Me too. I don't know why I'm speaking so forcefully because I really don't know, but I assume if
I
you're
was
using the
going
pronouns.
to assume that Mark wanted to be male,
Yeah.
but I don't know if Mark had gone into. So at some point when I saw crushed, I was like, okay, so Mark was cross dressing. Maybe Mark felt like that's weird, but they hadn't gotten the money or anything to make
But
go
you
for
don't
it.
have gender reassignment surgery to be trans though. It's about the identification. It's not really about the
Like I
physical.
said, this is out of my wheelhouse. So
Anyway,
yeah,
that's
Mark
why
Mark was born Mary.
and that's why they left, right? Malawi.
Yeah,
Um
because
and Mark
Mark's father was a pastor. So
yes.
I can imagine already. And Malawi has one of those really anti LGBT laws, really like stringent ones that they passed recently.
Oh really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Mark was an actor, and from what they describe, is like even when they were presenting as a girl, they used to take roles in plays and things that were male
Mas-
roles, right? That's what I understood. Yeah, so then they go to South Africa with an uncle who is kind of empathetic to
yes,
their situation, and then it's that uncle who recommends that they apply for a
yes,
scholarship
scholarship.
in Germany, which they get, and I'm just using they because I don't want to like mix up the pronouns. So they get that scholarship, and this is what annoyed me about this character. It's like, why did you fall out of status? You had a student visa. Yeah, the
I
visa was issued under your female identity, but why would
but
you put yourself in that predicament?
I think when I realized that it was just like, but if you're also you came on it, why are you always protesting? Like this is like if you're not listen, I always try to function from a place of you cannot pour out of an empty vessel, right? If you're running on E, how are you going to help the next person? Because you want to go and fight for people's rights, you ain't even got none for yourself. You're
That's true.
you're protesting against when they pick you up, which is eventually what happened. That Mark went to a protest, and then they were living in that church, and the police came. And Mark, out of all the friends that Mark had, Mark was the only person undocumented. Like the others had something to fall back on.
Mhm.
And Mark starts and ends up in this refugee camp. And the way that a lot of these camps were described is really not where you want to be. And eventually it's like, did Mark jump or was Mark pushed? Right?
Yes, the girlfriend kind of implied that they might have been pushed because somebody in the refugee camp like knew that
Yeah, yeah.
that they were trans, but it's never clarified beyond that point whether that's what happened. But yeah, Mark was just why?
I'm just like, if you don't have your correct donkey, just coast under the radar. You don't want to be just nobody's saying that you should hide. But
You're going to protest where people are like throwing stones at the police and doing all kinds of things?
like
Like
that's the
what?
first place they'll get you because every time the police round up people, they have to book you. Isn't that where they're going to catch you?
Yeah. Yeah, so Mark really annoyed me in that respect. But yeah. Was that the only character who died? I think so.
Main
Or
character, yes.
did
If
Juma
you
die?
consider, you said David. I mean,
Oh yeah,
David.
David wasn't really a main. Yeah. So David's story was also interesting, which I didn't really understand, right? So David is from Zambia. His dad was, living in exile. And the dad too is a very interesting character because the dad was one of these like in the 60s when the wave of independence and this political change was moving across Africa, they were one of these like movement leaders who had to go into exile because the government, was persecuting them. But the way the daughter describes it, eventually that administration goes away. It's no longer, it under threat. But he has kind of made this
His
name for himself in
identity.
Europe.
That was his identity.
Yeah, which I completely understand, right? He's a poet. He goes around giving talks on, the state of, African independence and nationalism. And it becomes decades and decades. This man has not set foot in Africa, but he's over there lecturing, and still quote unquote in exile, right? And estranged from his family, obviously. Portia, who is the daughter that we meet, she obviously has this kind of complicated relationship with her
with her
dad. Yeah. And then David, her brother, what does he, that one, I don't really
he
understand.
left. He just left and he never came back, never kept in touch. And it's not clear what his motive was. Like he was a very interesting character, but I want to go back to the dad because the part where they talked about their dad felt very familiar. They mentioned like the Heinemann writer series, which I read a lot
Mm-hmm.
of those books growing up. And one of the particular books we had at school but hated was Zambia Shall Be Free by Kenneth Kaunda, who was actually the first president of Zambia. And
Oh.
so her dad was like anti the Kaunda regime because I think it was a single party state at the time, which low-key dictatorship. But it seemed like it was a throwback to the writers of those days. And when the narrator and Portia went to the bookstore and the way they described, it was such a vivid description of some of the novels. Like they
Mm-hmm.
talked about Things Fall Apart and the image of Okonkwo on
Mm-hmm.
the cover. It that was like a little bit like heartwarming to me. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I could really, really see this character of the dad, right? Because there are people like that, them, right? I could really imagine it, and him and all his other writer
The
friends
friends,
who
yeah.
get together and they're debating, late into the night, and her mom. And I kept thinking to myself, why is this woman waiting for this man to come back?
Ma'am, how many aunties do you know like that?
That's true. That's true, though. But I just felt so bad for her. Like, just waiting. And the man is there in Europe living his
Living
best
his
life.
best
He's
life,
taking
drinking
a
wine,
girlfriend. Listen,
telling stories. They probably, like you said, like-minded people. You just talked about that, and I thought of, I think he passed away, Belasone Dipoko in Cameroon. He was a poet and writer. He was from somewhere in the southwest, like right after the toll gate. I don't remember. But he was a writer, and he was one of those, I think he had studied abroad but like wanted to reclaim his roots, so he would not shave and he used to walk, or they would say he would walk from his village to Douala, but you could always see him along the road walking every now and again. So it definitely took you back to like those writers and honestly thought leaders who came up at the verge of like colonialism and independence, and how they had all these ideals and how a lot of the societies did not live up to the ideals they had at the dawn of independence.
at all, at all. Somebody said on TikTok, like, imagine if Omniobe could see Cameron today. Hey, whoa.
Don't distract me, please, because Papillon said he's running for elections, and I said
I saw
Cameroon is
that.
Cameroon
I said, hey, we need all the candidates, please, everybody.
is
Yes,
I
let's make
beg
it
you.
interesting. At least we'll know the
It's
outcome.
no, they do it
But
for
let's
money
make
because
the.
the government gives people money to run their campaigns in Cameroon.
It's okay. Let's make it interesting.
Anyways, please,
Let's cosplay democracy.
let's move on, please.
Okay. I did want to just one more thing about the dad. It was really heartbreaking, and I think the mom should not have convinced him to come back. He should have lived out his fantasy in Europe until he died. That was heartbreaking
I
to me.
I think she regretted it also, but I was wondering, was he okay, or did he just have like a complete breakdown when he came back?
I want to say he just had a mental breakdown because imagine like the reality that must have been so jarring to think you're this important figure. He's thinking like there'll be like Secret Service or some kind of armed guard waiting for him at the airport. Nobody barely knows who he is. His friends are all retired or dead. Like the country that he left behind is nothing like what it looks today. Like he's a nobody essentially, and he has been living this grandiose life and this personality in Europe. Yeah, that would break you. That would make you lose your mind. So I think he was actually mentally okay before he came back.
But yeah, it doesn't say. I've forgotten what it said, but it seemed like her brother Portia and David had like a wide age gap,
Yes.
and then he just up and left one day without really explaining. And it seems like he never called, he never reached back. And it's just crazy that he lied. What really kills me is that when he got deported, he went to Mali, came back
Yes.
with a family, married this woman, took her to Mali to meet his family, and people were coming to visit in the morning. I was wondering because she said on the first day he left that he had to go meet the family. I was like, did he go to hire family members? But it seemed like they knew him. Like they said,
No.
they were very open that they adopted him. He washed
Hmm.
up on the shore, and I'm just like, what manner of
Yeah.
like,
That was crazy. I don't know why you wouldn't just be honest about that. Like it wasn't something necessarily bad.
but I'm curious as to why he left. Like, why did he leave his mother the way that he did?
I mean, it probably he probably also had daddy issues that were expressing in a different way. I would say because Portia, she says like she wanted to please her mom her whole life, right? That's probably why she even went to work in her mom's school. So him, David, I don't know, his own disappointment in his father probably expressed something some
So,
different way. Who knows?
yeah.
Yeah. Um. Okay. What did you find relatable as an immigrant yourself, like compared to the American experience, and what was surprising or foreign?
I mean, again, because I came the privileged route, I would not say I related to a lot of the stories people told. A lot of them told in how they found themselves in Europe. But I could think about like the narrator. The one thing that really stood out to me was the narrator when he lost his bag. Because I've gotten on a train in New York Grand Central where I was going somewhere else and I got on the wrong train. I almost went to Connecticut at midnight. I didn't know anybody in Connecticut. So to me, it was like, that's not an exaggeration. That is something that could happen. Now, we don't really have trains that go to Canada, so might not
Right.
really cannot. But it was just how quick life can change for you as an
Mm-hmm.
immigrant. And if you have a consular office that does not want to work with you or is not helpful, it could take you from that to Warsaw
Mm-hmm.
in 0 to 100, like just in no time.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't really relate to any of their experiences because they came in such, like under such traumatic in many
It's
cases
just, yeah,
situations. That's what pushed them to be immigrants. But just, I felt like the solidarity, right,
I
between
love that.
the immigrants it was very familiar and I loved it. Yeah. Whether
Yes.
you had papers or you didn't have papers, there was a solidarity among when they met each other.
The narrator just seemed to attract immigrants.
Bruh,
Tro-
immigrants in the
tro-
worst situation.
troubled immigrants. It was like, bruh, why can't you just, meet somebody like, hey, guy, I'm from here. I'm on a visa. My visa is fine. I have no problems. I have a job. Like, why you keep picking me?
Listen, Portia
I
was the
think
most like
most, yeah, that's it.
normal
Portia was the
person we
most like
met.
just average, first world problems person
Mm,
that he met. She didn't really have like every time like when their encounters that were shared, she willingly came to Europe to do something and was always going back.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So another reason I enjoy the book is that it's very relevant, right, in terms of current events in
Yeah.
the recent years. One thing that keeps repeating a lot of these migrant, and I like how the author ties their stories together. How a lot of them we find out that they were on that same boat from was it Libya? Yes,
Yeah.
the boat that like goes down like an hour after it leaves the shore because obviously it's not fit for you know
You know who I hope if hell is real, there needs to be a special room under the fire for smugglers
yes.
because they take advantage of people in the most desperate of situations. And like I would say that the immigration officer is doing their job, but they could have a little bit more empathy. But the smugglers, it's a choice. They
Mm-hmm.
could choose to take fewer people in safer conditions. There's so many ways they could do it with a a humane element, but they make choices not to. Be it the ones from Libya, be it the smugglers from South America trying to get food to the US border. There has to be a special place for them taking advantage of people at their most desperate time in life.
I don't know which of the characters in this story was describing how, because they had paid a certain amount, it was like there were certain tiers, right? Like they had paid a certain amount, so they got to be on the upper level of the boat. But there were people, migrants, who were below deck, and some of them even died before that boat sank just because of the conditions on the boat, right? And again, it's not seaworthy. It eventually goes down. There are not enough life rafts or buoys or whatever the hell, so
Nothing.
a lot of people drown. And this is the thing that, again, I'll say this: when Europeans and anybody who is from a privileged country, when they start talking shit about migrants, or why would you put yourself in that situation, that means you don't understand the level of desperation. For imagine an adult, you cannot swim, you carry a child who also cannot swim on a boat. Like that, do you not understand the level of desperation that you would have to have as a parent and as a person to make that decision? Like that's the one. Like people really, is such a lack of empathy to kind of talk down about people who have had to make that difficult choice, because so many of them drown, as we see in this novel, right?
I think about Karim a lot. Like the Karim story was one that stood out to me because I believe Karim's father migrated from Sudan to
Mm-hmm.
Somalia, and then Karim married a Somali woman of like average standing, moderate, moderate
Mm-hmm.
wealth in Somalia, and they had to run, not even because Somalia got bad, but because somebody who obviously had more wealth and more power. And again, it also shows you, even in Somalia, he was already a migrant, because
Yes.
part of the reason why he had to leave was it was very clear that they were going to other him. Like, is that how you guys behave where you're from? And so it's almost like he's running, but what does he consider home? And I think that's it's also evident in the way that he's just floating with his son, because they left Somalia, they went to Yemen. They tried to make things work in Yemen for a while. They went to Syria, and I think he would have liked to stay in Syria, but we
Mm-hmm.
know that war broke out in Syria in 2011, 2012, and so they had to leave Syria. But his wife was like, "Okay, stay behind with the girls and go with the boys." And then they went to Bulgaria, and which Bulgaria, it was a stroke of luck. It wasn't anything that he did. He just happened to have his boys who were learning the languages, and they became essential for the upkeep in the camp because they became translators. And so people decided to help them. But then you bring religion also inside the matter, which,
Yes. Another theme in this book, which is not a strong theme, is religious extremism, right? Let's go back to
yeah,
David, aka Musa, who gets adopted by, the Muslim
Imam
family, an
and
imam in
yeah,
Mali. And from what his wife describes, I don't know if she was telling the truth, but he started treating her very poorly and wanting her to convert to Islam, and that was kind of the source of their marriage
okay.
falling apart. And then we have, his name is slipping my mind now, but Karim's older son, who,
Fadel
yes, he gets recruited by Jehovah's Witness.
as well.
Jehovah's Witness, you people are menaces. Like,
Not too much on them, because yesterday I saw there was a roundup for Mormons for Harris, or Latter Day Saints for Harris, and somebody said we need Jehovah Witnesses for Harris because they're gonna do the door to door.
they gonna trek in their black and white. Listen, they
So
gonna knock on every door. You can count on them for that. But yeah, they recruit. And I mean, when you are in that kind of precarious, very unstable situation, especially as a teenage boy, I can totally empathize with him why he would have gone with them, right? No, I see it.
of
I
course,
see
no,
it.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, they probably offered comfort. And
Yes.
things that he has not experienced for as long as he's been on the move with his dad. It's very
Mm-hmm.
easy. And I do appreciate that they used a form of Western religion to show another side of extremism, because
Yeah.
far too often when we think about religious extremism, it's always Islam. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that showing in this state, because I was just thinking, yeah, like, yeah, for sure, these Jehovah Witnesses brainwashed his child.
Oh, for sure. And that's the thing. Another thing they describe in the novel, these people are persistent because they kept coming back after their father has driven them away. Why do you keep coming back to the same family? They have told you they're not interested.
They're winning souls for somebody.
Listen, there's a section of TikTok that is dedicated to making fun of Jehovah's Witnesses, or not making fun of them, but like making fun of people's reactions when they see them coming, like how people
I'm
run and hide.
so this feels like a relatable content. Now I'm probably going to go look it up. But there's a Nigerian author, El Nathan John, and he shared a few months ago he was born and raised in a Jehovah Witness family, and he said his biggest fear was he was going to die because they had said masturbation was wrong, and like you would, and so he would not leave the house as a teen. He was just always afraid of going outside because he felt like there were eyes and he's going to die. And so when he found the courage to leave eventually, he doesn't necessarily have a relationship with his family because of that. But to this day he has anxiety just off of the hold that religion had on him growing up. And so,
Yeah.
like, I feel like we're kicking about it, but I think that it's also right to talk about how the extreme practice of it, what could happen.
Yeah, and there are other, I think there are other extreme, like Scientology is like that, right? If you leave, you lose your family. You can't just denounce a religion and still have those connections. I believe some Mormon groups are like that as well. If
Mhm.
you leave, again, you're cut off from your community, your family. So it's, and then another instance of religious extremism that's mentioned in the book and kind of ties into current events is Boko Haram,
And
which
Juma, yeah.
is, yeah, for the people who are not familiar, Boko Haram is an extremist group in the north of Nigeria and Cameroon. And one of the characters, Juma, has to flee his village because they're being terrorized by Boko Haram. And he actually goes to a refugee camp in Cameroon, which they didn't say like where, but obviously it's up there in the
Well,
north.
Nord.
Yeah, and then from
Uh,
there he makes the trek up north. Yeah.
Another thing in Karim's story is Karim describes Somalia before 1990. Growing up in Cameroon, all I knew about Somalia was war, famine,
Mm.
and just nothing necessarily good. But I guess it ties into when I came of age, because what he describes about Somalia was he had a store, he got a loan from his in-laws, and they were living comfortably. That's not
Mm-hmm.
a narrative of Somalia I've ever heard, because from as far back as I can remember, Somalia was war torn, lawless, famine, and then in more recent times, Al Shabaab. But in
Mm-hmm.
Karim's story, he talks about after he left, which he left in 2002, I think is when he left. He says,
I don't remember.
I can't remember. I know 2012 they were in Syria. So I don't remember when they left, but however, he talks about the proliferation of Al Shabaab after they left, and so it's like, yeah, that's all I've known. It was like war, no presidents, famine, Al Shabaab, but there was definitely a time when life was good, and I think some of these things are good to be talked about, because we are the adults now, and we don't necessarily have any memory or imagery of a time when Somalia was like stable.
True. I just had a kind of depressing thought is that the children who are growing up now in some parts of the northwest of Cameroon
Have never
who
known
never really
peace.
saw Bamenda when Bamenda was Bamenda. You know?
Please don't remind me, because
Yeah.
the last time I went to Bamenda was 2014, and I said, like, I took my daughter there, but she wasn't even a year old, and that's like one of my biggest, like, she's 10 now. This is like a whole 10 years we've not been able to go back. And like you said, I would have loved to show her Bamenda when Bamenda was Bamenda.
Yeah.
Like, there's December in Bamenda is
And that's a town where, yeah, there maybe you could say that some things have tried to bounce back, but think about like the people who live in certain villages, that those villages were burned to the ground. They're deserted now. Yeah, it's horrible. Another thing that I like that the author did is that he mentioned this refugee camp in France called the Jungle, which was a real refugee camp. It was shut down in 2016. I think it was only open for like a year and a half. And it was shut down. And yeah, the conditions described there, because Juma, one of the characters, he spends just a few days there, I believe, but it was really like, um, a jungle. And that's one thing that surprised me about this book. Maybe I'm naive. I thought that Europeans took a little better care of the refugees
when
in their custody. The way they were describing those refugee camps, I was like, really? Like,
before, but I think like and and it's funny because people never look at why is there a sudden influx of refugees, right? A lot of like the Libya, like there's a high influx from the when Gaddafi was killed. There's
mm-hmm,
been a high influx of it, and then it's just spread to like Cameroon where we have the crisis, and so people are trying to get out, and there's all these other things that have popped up everywhere. I mean, the creation of South Sudan, but there's so much instability in Sudan itself and in
mm-hmm,
South. So there's all these things that are triggering, and so there's now this huge influx where people are only like, why? They see people coming and nobody is fixing, like asking. I mean, they talk about it sometimes. Why? Why are they coming? What is happening?
mm-hmm.
Because I'm not like, none of this was surprising because I feel like there was a time, maybe 2016, where we would see images of like bodies washed ashore in Lampedusa, Italy,
Yep.
and where they were coming up with all these schemes to like make certain places not part of the country so that if you got there they would say, well, you never got into the EU and we can send you back.
And I'm gonna
So
say this: Greece. There have been credible news reports about Greece taking migrants back out to sea. Like, I saw one recently that they took migrants back out to sea and literally just dumped them in the water. Last year, I think it didn't get a lot of coverage because these stupid billionaires were going down to see the Titanic, but it was around that time, Ocean Gate, around that time where a boat sank in the Mediterranean and hundreds of people drowned. And according to credible, again, these are credible news reports, like BBC did a whole thing. The Greek, whether it's their navy or one of their maritime fleets, knew that that ship was in distress and ignored until it was actually in the water. So they could have saved a lot of those migrants, but they ignored the whether it was distress signals, but they knew that that boat was in distress and they ignored. And I've seen multiple reports like this of Greek Coast Guard. I don't know if it's Coast Guard or their Navy, basically leaving, boats in distress there for the migrants to die, and also taking migrants out to sea and abandoning them.
see, immigration is very complex, and especially when it comes to refugees, because I want to say Greece relies on tourism, and we've heard about like the Greek economy and austerity and them fighting austerity measures and just not having the resources. But I think it's also a culture thing because African society is not like a lot, you don't have a lot of wealthy people, right? But it's always been a society where we welcome people. Even if you try to share the little that you have. We all know, like, you go visit your grandmother or somebody in the village and everybody wants to give you, they don't have a lot, but everybody's trying to like, hey, you've come to visit, or take this little thing when you're going back. It seems to be a cultural thing where it's just like, I can't help you, and it's just done.
I
But
get
I
that it's a
think
burden, right?
but
But you cannot leave people to die.
I think that something that became very clear, we saw it once we had Ukrainian refugees, and the
Mm-hmm.
narrative completely changed. There was
Mm-hmm.
like a humane aspect to it, which is also like, in the US it was a crack epidemic and opioid crisis. And it's just, we see these things over and over again, whether we want to accept it or not, how the language changes based off of who it is. And you know what is funny? It's just no matter what, African migrants will always get the short end of the stick, because even the students who were studying in Ukraine when the war broke out, some of them shared the ordeals, like what they had to go through to leave. And it's just like, wow. So even we're all fighting for our lives, but you've decided your life is worth way more than mine.
And remember, Daniel talked about it. Daniel Say, who came to talk to us about, immigration in the US, he talked about how when that war broke out, or when Russia attacked Ukraine, the US was very fast to give Ukraine TPS, while, groups like his had been petitioning for TPS for Cameroon for a long time. And it's like that, Ukraine got it, and, Cameroonians had to go through so much to petition to get that.
I don't, it's like I said, it's very complex, because again, everybody, I like to tell people that don't look at politicians as, especially when you're from a foreign country, right? Don't, I want to say, like, when people say, what did Barack Obama do for Africans or this? My man, he's the president of America. He's not the
America.
president. He's like, it's always America's interest first and everything. Ukraine means way more to America than Cameroon. Sorry, but not sorry. Like,
Unfortunately.
it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Um,
I do like that they talked about the doctor who went to Rome to study and he missed his little fishing town. So he came back and he saw the bodies washing up ashore and he decided to stay and would offer services in the refugee camps. I wish we got more stories like that of people who saw refugees and migrants as human beings and wanted to help them and did not just all think that they were bad.
to be fair, like that part of the novel surprised me, right? Because I was expecting a portrayal of what I see in the media, which is this very anti immigrant sentiment. And he does have some of that in the book, which is realistic, right? When Mateo takes our narrator to town for a cup of coffee or something, and the waitress is very rude to him because obviously he's a migrant.
Mhm.
But to your point, there were people in that small town who were volunteering. They would go out on boats to kind of patrol the water looking for people who, ships or boats that had sank to rescue people. So
Yeah.
that was refreshing. How realistic it is, I have no idea. But based on the rest of the novel, which he does have a lot of realistic, experiences, I assume that that one is also realistic, that there are people like that who going out of their way to help migrants in the refugee camps. So yeah, I like that part. Okay. So on to the romances in the novel, right? Obviously, our narrator, when we meet him, he's married
Yeah.
to Gina. She's an American painter. I like her, because she really doesn't let him, and he's not a good husband, but she really doesn't let him derail her career and, what she's doing. She's very focused on her work. One thing that annoyed me about him is that he brings Mark, who is a transient and has nowhere to live, brings him to the house without asking his wife whether Mark can stay over. And I'm like, why would you not ask her?
You have to add, he brought Mark on a day where he forgot to bring wine and came late to a dinner party she was hosting. I
Yes.
feel like that would set me off, man. Like,
Bruh.
do you know how to fight? Like, catch me outside because.
You're already late. You did not pick up the drinks that you were supposed to pick up to host your wife's guest. And then you're bringing this vagrants to come and sleep on the couch. Like that. I was like, bro, like who does that? So yeah, it was clear that their marriage, I knew their marriage was going to fall apart.
I mean, from the way he described it, right? Like, sometimes when you move, it's a new. It was obvious that it was over, but I sort of like the way they handled their separation and like their decision to go. I think Germany was like a trial run to see like maybe is this gonna work in a different country, but
Mhm.
if they had been honest with themselves, they were done before they got to Germany.
Agree. Yeah. Another interesting story, which we don't get to see the end, right? But we can just hope for the best. So Manu is a Libyan man he's with his daughter. They get separated from his wife and his wife's son. They're on this boat that, sinks off the coast. And for a lot of the novel, he goes to this train station every Sunday where they had agreed that if they get separated, they will meet.
Meet.
So he goes there a few times, and then at one point, towards the end of his story, he has a conversation with this other character who is a woman that they have kind
He
of
met. Yeah.
met along the way and made this kind of little blended family with her.
I think
Not
she's
romantic.
Eritrean. She's Eritrean, right? The
Hannah,
lady.
I don't remember.
She was Eritrean.
But her husband died, and then she kind of confronts Manu like, you're going to this train station every day. Your daughter knows that your wife is dead. So then it's kind of heartbreaking for us, the reader. It's like, oh no, his wife, is dead, and he's kind of just being delusional, going to this train station every day, like hoping that he'll see her. And he's a bouncer at a nightclub where the way they describe it is like white women come to pick up
Black African, yes.
Older white women come to pick up young African men, kind of like escorts, which he ends up in that situation with some rich lady, which, I mean, I liked it for him a little bit. I don't know about their dynamic, but at least,
Yeah, I felt bad because he offered his daughter, like, taking his daughter there that day. They got to see the horse and everything. And then the husband says, so how long? Because then I was confused. She said they were separated, but he was in there. So, like, how did he figure out what was going? But I like my man Manu. He doesn't like trouble. The minute he heard them arguing, it's like, let's bounce, please.
Yeah, I just felt bad for his daughter because...
I felt bad for her, yeah.
Yeah. But... So we, at the end of Manu's story, we're like, damn, okay, so his wife really died. Like, we feel bad for him. And then we go now to this small Italian coastal town where our narrator has found himself after getting on the wrong train and being transferred. And he meets this man, Matteo, Matteo shares the story how he finds a woman who is washed up on the shore with a small child. Matteo was a bit sick in the head because he takes them in, nurses them to health. She has lost her memory. He falls in love with her like after one day. I'm like, what is going on, sir? You're taking advantage of this woman. She's lost her memory. Obviously, she's in distress.
Sure.
She has nothing. He coerces her into this romantic relationship, gives her a new name, Sophia, makes up this story, tells her that they knew each other back in Libya, and they get married and they're living this fantasy life. And then one day her memory comes back, which is his worst nightmare, which I got really annoyed. It's like he kind of was upset, or he was sad, not upset. He was sad that she regained her memory because then it dissolved the fantasy that he had created. Matteo was not all right.
No. But I mean, he did admit it, right? Like, working at the camp had taken a toll on him. So, whew, yeah.
He was not all right. And I was happy when we kind of get the realization that this Sophia is actually Basma, who is Manu's wife, who he thinks is dead. And she gets her memory back. She remembers that they said they were going to meet at that train station. So we don't know what happens, but I assume she goes to Berlin and eventually
I hope
reunites.
he had not stopped going, because that would really suck.
I think he had stopped after that conversation he had with Hannah.
And these are the things that are really heartbreaking about, because it doesn't seem far-fetched. It really feels like things that happened.
Yeah. So that was very interesting, to me. Is this star-crossed? Those intertwined stories.
Intersectionality.
Yes, and that's one thing I like about this novel. I like stories where people, like, parallel lines eventually cross, right?
Yes. And when you make the connection.
Yeah. I like it because Manu was on that boat. Juma was on there.
No.
Yeah, and Juma even recounts how he met Manu, and Manu was crying that his wife and son are in the water, and he tried to even jump in after them, but he had his daughter. So yeah, I love stories like that, where people who seem like they're not connected, eventually you find out
And it wasn't one of those complicated ones to make the connection. It was
Mm-mm.
like you were just reading and it's like, oh, like every
Mm-hmm.
time I made a connection, it's like my eyes are just like enjoy seeing it, which I did enjoy that. That it wasn't one of those ones where they were doing too
No,
much.
they weren't. Yeah. So, what was there something you disliked about the
The book,
novel?
no, not really. I the only thing I disliked was the audiobook. I started listening to it and I did not it wasn't because I didn't like the way the person was reading, but it was easy for me to listen to. But when I realized I wasn't making progress, I decided to read. And I was thankful that I switched to reading because I don't think somebody narrating the part about Portia's father being an author and the Heinemann series would have had much of an effect hearing it in that voice versus reading it in my own voice. So that's the only thing, which it has nothing to do with the content of the book. I really enjoyed it. I cannot think of one thing that I'm like
Yeah,
I enjoyed
same.
the book. I just remembered like there was a lot of mention about the conference 1884 conference, the Scramble for Africa, and they kept referencing that. And when Portia talked about, the atrocities the Germans committed in Namibia, like
Mm-hmm.
it was it was like a history book or there was so much context to it and it was nice. It's not my typical genre. Like it had some romance, but it was not feel good romance, but it wasn't
No.
necessarily one where I felt like my chest, my heart was going to fall out of my chest just from angst. Maybe because I did not relate to the stories. It was sad, but it was not a dehumanizing sad. Is the way I think most of the characters realized that even though they were not dealt the best cards in life, not a lot of them were not necessarily like beaten or they did not appear to be beaten down and just like worn out, so it wasn't like a particularly like super sad book.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was a good balance, and the author tells the story in a way that it's still empowering to the characters, even though they're going through obviously something, terrible. One thing that struck me, which again, another very realistic part of the book, is that Manu is actually a surgeon in
Yes.
Libya. And then he comes to Berlin and he's a bouncer.
Yes, that it made me think about just like a lot of immigrant we talked about is maybe like our first season, the third episode or so, where we talked about like relationship dynamics in immigrant communities, and where we said like women tend to be more adaptable. They tend to pivot and change careers where the men are not always amenable. They can't find things, they don't have the same place in society that they had at home. And for a lot of men there's difficulty in like adapting. And there was a part where Manu was talking with his friend who worked at the club with him, and the way that guy talked reminded me of the way where one of my dad's sisters always say, don't mess with the cab driver at the Atlanta airport because all they do is gossip. So it was definitely that part was definitely realistic where you see men who have immigrated, they're trying to figure it like yes, they want to take care of their families, but far too often they struggle to adapt in a way that their wives don't always seem to.
Yeah. And Manu, I had a lot of empathy for him because he's described kind of as a big, obviously, that's why he got the job as a bouncer. He's a bigger man, and he talks about he's always conscious
Dark
that he has to smile so that he's not intimidating
skin.
people. Like when he meets Angela's husband unexpectedly at her house, like he's very consciously like smiling so that he's not seen as a threat, which I think that's a very real experience for black men all over the world, right? Especially when interacting with people of other races.
Yes, and also the fact that he's very like for he's darker skinned than the average Libyan, and it's something that always comes up where people say, "I've never met somebody from Libya as dark as you."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he says, I think one of his parents is Nigerian, but he says there are Libyans who look like me,
Yeah,
which I think I don't want to get sidetracked in that conversation, but in these North African countries, there's this perception that they all have this they look like a stereotypical Arab. But there are black Egyptians and black Moroccans, obviously black Libyans, and but
I mean
people kind of have that expectation.
we know where the Arabic features came from.
Okay, so if you did not read along with us, I highly recommend this book, Travelers. It's very engaging. And as we have said, there are a lot of realistic experiences and themes in this book, things that are ongoing today, like with the migrant crisis and the refugee crisis in Europe. So I definitely recommend reading it. All
Yeah.
right. We didn't pick an August book of the month. I was going to leave that to you since I picked this one.
You've been doing such a great job because if I pick a book, we're reading romance. So I'm gonna let you do what you do. If you can pick something with this, not same. It doesn't have to be immigration, but like one where I'm not going to need a therapist when I'm done. Then yeah.
Okay. I'll pick one and then we'll post it on our Instagram, and then obviously we'll announce
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
next episode. Okay. If you are not already subscribed to our YouTube at Two Bees in a Pod, go ahead and do that, and follow us on Instagram at Two Bees Pod. Until next time.
Diamond no the fear bearing ground.
The literal translation is a
A
dead
dead
man. Go
is
ahead.
not afraid of a graveyard. I
Yes,
mean,
a
they're
dead
dead.
man is not afraid of a grave.
They're dead. Although, Shannon Doherty, who played Brenda in Beverly Hills 90210, passed recently, and it is
Mm.
said that she left a list of people who are not allowed at her funeral. And I just feel I'm thankful. I'm thankful because I've talked about leaving such a list before, but then I told myself it didn't matter because I was dead, but I still had people where I was like, this person can't sit in the front seats, like they got to sit in the back. But I just feel validated now that somebody put time back to making my list.
Wow. People who are not allowed at my funeral. I mean, you should put that in your last will and testament. Make sure that it's followed.
Of course. And if they
Okay.
don't follow it, something will happen. It's just like I've always wanted, Eve's paw print tattoos that she has
Mm-hmm.
up. I've wanted that since I was 13. I've decided that if I didn't have it in life, that they need to do, it don't have to be real tattoo. It could even be, press and peel and
The
stick.
sticker.
But whatever they putting me in the ground with, they gotta make sure that they got a low V, it's padded, and I got my paw prints. If I didn't get it in life, at least give it to me.
It's not too late. Why is it too late to get them?
It's not that it's too late. It's just I made peace with it. It's not my portion in this lifetime. What is the moral? Like,
It's like I feel like it's like you cannot scare somebody who has nothing to lose. That was my interpretation. And I thought of in the book Juma, who is doing a hunger strike. And
yeah,
at one point he says that he's doing it to show that he's not afraid of anything. Like nobody can scare him with anything again, because if he can refuse food, then they should know that he's not afraid of anything. It kind of, when I saw this, and that's why I picked this one, because it kind of reminded me of that kind of, what are you going to, how will you scare somebody who has nothing to lose, right? Because, how you scare the diamond? He's not afraid.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, like you really. What are you going to tell somebody who's not afraid of anything? Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, if any of our listeners, viewers has a different interpretation, I would love to hear it. But that's kind of what came to me.
I agree. Well, until next time, tune in next episode for a very, very interesting episode with Ashangdoa Akwo of Mindqua, a Cameroonian-based financial fintech startup, to learn more about what they do, how their app works, and especially for those of you in the diaspora, if you have family who is constantly asking you to send World Remit, send Wave, any of the apps, send money. It's very valid and a good tool for young people of all ages, but particularly for young people to build good money habits. So we
Great.
cannot wait for you to hear it.
Tune in next week for that.